deal with the minutes.
Okay.
And then I think Rick should hopefully join us. So we have 2 sets of minutes outstanding. One is July 28th. Well, I should, we are in the recording, so it's a planning board meeting of December 8th. And Portia Hinshaw is unable to attend. She's not feeling well tonight. And the first item that we are looking at is the approval of the outstanding minutes. So there was one for July 28th. Did anybody have any changes to that? If not, can I have a motion to approve it?
I move we approve the minutes of whatever, the 28th, July
And a
28th.
second? I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
And I'm assuming that Rich is in agreement. Hi, Rick. We're just going ahead and dealing with the minutes.
Okay.
To give you a moment here to get in.
Hello,
And
all.
the other one was November 10th. Does anybody have any changes to that?
No, looks okay to me.
Okay, so can I have a motion to approve then?
I move we approve the minutes of November 10th.
I second. And I'm assuming everyone is in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and I'm not seeing Rich, but not hearing any dissent. Both sets of minutes are approved. So my thought, things haven't really changed very much since the last time we were together. Jay had made a suggestion about a referral mechanism. So we're still working with the same draft of the local law that we had last time. Jay had made a suggestion about a referral mechanism that if the bar wants to refer it over to the planning board, it can do so. And so I think it's worthwhile for Jay and Rick and all of us to discuss that so he can put that language in. For the moment, the question had been raised about, did road cuts, docks, I'm trying to think what the other 2 issues were.
Tree cutting outside of the formal application.
Sorry,
Tree cutting outside of an
formal
application.
application and then
Blasting.
last,
Blasting.
thank you.
Right.
I mean,
For the moment,
sorry.
so I had indicated just generally, obviously up for this discussion this evening, that was okay if the trustees want to shift that to the planning board. I think the concern that David had was it shouldn't be dealt with at the end of an application. It needs, many of these issues need to be dealt up front. So those are sort of the 2 items. And I'm going to wait for Jay to come back. The 2 items this evening, one is the one I just discussed is for the moment moot. But if anyone feels that they don't want those possible topics to come to the planning board, if you could say so.
Why do you think it's moot?
Well, David sent an email saying that he wanted to talk to the trustees about whether to move forward on adding that to the planning board responsibilities.
I thought he had said in his email yesterday that without objection today, I will move forward with maintaining control of road cuts, trees being cut outside of formal applications, blasting and docks to the planning board, but also maintain the right, I assume, of the Board of Trustees to cede that control upon majority vote back to the Board of Trustees. That's how I read it. It's a little bit confusing, but
okay,
that's how
I
I read
was
it.
sort of reading it that he was holding on to it, but I think what we should do this evening, and I think perhaps Rich is having a bit of challenge with his technology. He's visible now. Now all we need is sound. I can say that I do not have a problem with those items being transferred to the planning board, should the trustees want to do that. There is some confusion about that tree cutting provision, whether it's cutting trees independently of an application, cutting trees in an application.
I think it's outside of an application. 'Cause
Yeah, I
typically-
think that is the language that's in the existing code.
And as
that-
I understand it, at least the last time we dealt with this a number of years ago, is that it was the building inspector who dealt with the issue of tree cutting, like maximum, I think it's 4 trees a year or something like that. And I thought that was done through John's office of whether or not to grant a permit.
There's been discussion, and there's, John, you want to say that there clearly is text in the code that deals with this issue. People seem to be a bit confused about how it's supposed to be applied. John, you want to talk about that one?
Well, the village code definitely gives people the authority to remove 4 trees per year over a certain size. Anything above 4 trees per year requires a permit from the Board of Trustees.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Yes. The issue that I'd like to bring up tonight, because I'm not sure if it's clear, if someone has an application before the board, I think anything within the site plan may be under the jurisdiction, of the bar or whoever's reviewing that site plan, whether it's planning board or bar. But I don't remember if that included items that were outside of the site plan. I'm trying to upload the code, but I don't see it here. Hang on a second.
Well, that is why I'd gone to that language, because historically, at least the way we've been operating is you're in front of the bar, you're in front of the planning board, you're making a request to do various things and take down X number of trees, and those boards are dealing with it as part of the application.
Yes.
So my understanding was this was sort of to the side. We've had issues or instances where residents have not had a site plan, not been planning to do anything, just have come in and started cutting down trees.
If I can jump in a second, I think that this process is running backwards. And this seems to have started because the mayor and/or other members of the Board of Trustees were unhappy with the way that the parking lot application for the Tuxedo Club was handled. And are also somewhat unhappy at perhaps a feeling, whether it's real or not, that the application process in general is overly complex and convoluted. And they sort of asked us our opinion, and we gave a couple of opinions, and all of a sudden they've asked us to rewrite our jurisdiction, but they haven't really, as far as I can tell, done anything that is a sort of holistic look at the application process for the village. So I'm feeling like some suggestions that we'd be willing to take over these other duties if you want to give them to us are great, but I'm not sure how much law writing we can do if we're not going to sit down with the other boards or everybody to sort of get a feeling on how we handle the whole question of the application process.
David has gone out with and you've probably seen it, a village-wide email saying, hey, if you have commentary about the process, let me know. I have been in dialogue with the chairs of the other boards, who basically were of the inclination to not change anything. They thought things were just fine. And that no changes should be made to the process. So David, clearly, and I believe some of the other trustees clearly do believe things should be changed. And there were, in my mind, some specific issues for historical reasons. For example, new houses really should come to the planning board. And, you know, it was the code for a variety of reasons was written that if there was a pre-existing building, that didn't happen. So that was something that I felt definitely should be fixed. I'm in the camp, I think, along with the chair of the BZA and the bar, that the current system is actually working pretty well. And therefore, we are looking to adjust around the margins, but not completely redo. And David's original theory was the bar never deals with the engineers at all. They purely do aesthetics. Everything goes to the planning board for site planning. And I felt that the current bar system on the whole was working pretty well. So that is how this process, it wasn't my expectation, but that is how this process sort of ended up here. And with the version that we have in front of us, which my understanding is reflective of at least my perspective, and it's reflective of the other two chairs' perspective because they weren't inclined to change anything.
Okay.
So, so that's kind of, and when we get a, you know, so the question in my mind this evening was to have you and Rick and all of us, but discuss that referral mechanism so that Rick knows what to draft. And then we have something that's back in front of the trustees and goes out to the other chairs to see, you know, how they feel about it. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable here. I'm speaking for other people, but I have been in these series of emails among the chairs. You know, I think they feel that the current process is working pretty well, with the exception of the new houses. We've expanded that somewhat to think about issues where there are site planning questions that should be in front of this board, because I think our expertises and our interests are different. I mean, we're more focused on the infrastructure and how we hook into the sewers and the water and drain kind of things, and the bar has a much heavier focus on the architectural.
So then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't agree with David's view that they can be so neatly bifurcated. I think when you're dealing with a renovation, the site plan, the architecture, those issues are integral, and to sort of try and lift them up and segregate them off to the planning board, that would make, in my opinion, the procedure more difficult for the applicant.
Right. So we sort of started with that, with my idea of some sort of referral, you know, emergency stop, right? So that the bar can say, hey, wait a minute, this is getting too technical. We would like planning board to look at this. I guess, I mean, and I'm happy with that idea. Do we want to try to establish sort of what the thresholds would be where it almost automatically comes to us to look at? I mean, a renovation that doesn't involve any changes to, you know, the hard, you know, impervious area or number of bathrooms or, you know, other infrastructure items, there's nothing for us to look at, right?
Yeah,
If it's all in the same footprint. But do we want it to then say But if you're going to change all of those things, it automatically comes to us, or we want to leave it to the bar to sort of use their best judgment about when they're in over their heads.
But Jay, if I may, I'm a little confused. You mixed a number of things there that are extremely different. You just started your conversation by impervious area,
Mhm.
then you went to number of bathrooms. So I understand impervious area may be something the planning board has concerned about because it affects drainage and infrastructure.
Right.
But did you really mean to say number of bathrooms?
I guess my thought was if the planning board's expertise and purview are, for want of a better description, engineering items. So impervious area, obviously, if somehow changing the number of bathrooms is, I guess, if we had septic fields, it would be a bigger deal because.
Well, I was just gonna say that if changing the number of bathrooms impacted the size of the septic field, and that had to be reviewed and approved by, internally and also by the health department, yes, that would trigger it.
Right. So I
mean-
mean, that was my idea, not necessarily specific. I mean, just sort of items that would lead to a more technical review, I guess let's leave it at that.
So the law as it is currently drafted in section 4, basically E is spelling out what goes to the bar. So it says the bar approve, modify, disapprove, landscaping, aesthetics is misspelled, so we should fix that. Buildings and structures, and it has site plan jurisdiction for the existence of any building, garage, renovations, additions, cabana, shed, gazebo, greenhouse, folly, animal shelter, and playhouse. So basically what it's saying is, if it's an existing renovation, it's going to go to the bar. If it's a new house, if it's educational, if it's commercial, it's coming to us. And and I think we left pools because they involve typically terrain alteration, pools with the planning board. So we're laying out, this stuff goes to you, this stuff would come to us. And, so we can either provide a formal mechanism for the bar to say, hey, we're concerned about this issue. Or, my inclination would be simply to say, the bar, if they feel they need help, can reach out to us, and it doesn't have to be plugged into the law. So I would be inclined to just leave this draft as is. And certainly the bar is in a position to reach out to us. John is in a position to say, guys, I think you should reach out. The law is spelling out where they have to reach, where the applicant has to come to us.
Right. So
I think that
just-
as a
sorry.
practical matter, the bar, at least when I was advising the bar, they many times, if not most times, had an engineer there, right, to assist.
Right.
The engineer didn't do very much for most of the time until it got into so-called site plan engineering issues, and then he would weigh in. If we are giving the bar this limited jurisdiction, which typically does not need any engineering advice, if the bar does not have an engineer at the table, then whenever they came up against an engineering issue, I think that's when they would refer it over to the planning board. If they have an engineer there, they'll just ask the engineer. But
Yeah,
if the
and I
engineer
think-
isn't going to be assigned, which would keep down costs, then I think it would be helpful in the law to have a general provision saying that any particular matter or a portion of a matter may be referred by the bar to the planning board for a report and recommendation back. And then they would get the report and recommendation back from the planning board, and then they would do whatever they wanted.
Okay. Or at least my intention in discussing this was not to take the engineer away from the bar. I think David was kind of thinking that way. The reality is the engineer works for both boards, and has insight into things. And I think what needs to happen is it needs at the bar level and the planning board level, but at the bar in particular, to be clear to the engineer and John, working with the engineer, you are reviewing X. You're not, you're not reviewing some cosmic scope here. Here's the issue
Well,
you're being asked.
except I think you'll run into a problem, and Jay may correct me, but you run into a problem that you have a board who are not engineers for the most part, and they say to the engineer, can you please review this and identify any engineering problems? And the engineer will look at the whole application as a result to professionally to go ahead and see if there's anything in there. So I don't think it's realistic for the bar to say, I only want you to look at this one little piece, because they may not know if there are engineering issues relating to some other piece.
Well, I guess the question is, and that's one of David's issues that he's trying to drive at, but you would in reality just be moving that issue from the bar to the planning board, because we also rely on an engineer. So let me put this in front of you. David is saying the applicant is coming in, the applicant has is certified a drawings for whatever they're getting ready to do that has been signed off by an architect. So Rick, in your experience, does that require an independent review, or do jurisdictions take the fact that, this design of this, well, let's not make new houses. Let's just say this renovation. It's got an architect, the architect has signed off on it. Is that sufficient? Or do most jurisdictions require a review of the architect's work?
It's a difficult question because most boards, most municipalities don't operate in the fashion that you do, right? They'll have an architectural review board that in 9 out of 10 times is the planning board. It's the same board. And they do that for a particular purpose. A very efficient purpose is that they can put the hat back and forth on their head as to ARB or BAR and planning board, and they don't need to make any formal recommendations, and they have one engineer who's looking at everything. If there's an architect assigned, then the architect looks at something. But you don't have a situation like this where you're so fine tuning what the BAR is dealing with. Clearly with an addition, there are engineering issues involved with an addition.
Well, that's my perspective is
If-
that, the bar is going to need an engineer. And that same engineer, just if you pick the problem up and you move it over to us, there's still going to be an engineer involved.
But then why would you need a referral? The engineer would deal with drainage issues and everything else, which is how it's working now.
If I
Right.
can- if I can jump in for a second, because I do this. Quite often, the boards, there's really two tracks. Either the boards accept the drawings with the engineer or architect seal for all the items that would be under that professional's purview and don't ask to do an independent review unless they see something that they feel is so critical or so off the wall that they're not willing to just accept the applicant's engineering at face value. So I don't know. I want to put a new dam on my property to create a pond, and I say it's going to be great, and they say, yeah, we're going to look at this too. Or I say, I've got this great new design for a house and it's all made out of glass, and here I prove it works, and they feel that there's some larger issue. Obviously, I'm picking ridiculous examples. I think that David's point that it doesn't make sense to force the applicant to pay for a village engineer to review every aspect of every application is reasonable.
I agree, but I think that is kind of, that is the bar chair laying out what is the expected review, as you just discussed. You know, if it's a renovation and there's an architectural seal on it, and, you know, is that, and if there's a later problem and the village hasn't reviewed, it is the applicant and the applicant's architect that have the problem to resolve.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a matter of internal policing. I tend to agree with Rick, though, that I think there should be we have the sort of the work assignments in the law as they currently stand, which I think are fine. I think there should be something that comes to the planning board that has architectural concerns automatically goes to the BAR because they weigh in on that stuff. I think it doesn't have to be automatic, but there should be a specific permission for the bar to refer something to the planning board. And the reason I say that is for the applicant who says, oh yeah, it ain't in the law, I ain't doing it.
Okay. And that's why we're all here tonight, you know, because you've made that point. I think it's a good point, and I wanted you and Rick and all of us, if Rich has a different perspective on it, to, you know, talk that through so that Rick is in a position to add that to the existing language. And then I think we have something that is going forward to the trustees and the other board chairs. And, you know, they need to decide whether this is representative of what they want or not.
Right. Oh, I agree with you. I also think, and I promise this is the last thing I'm going to say,
No
for a
promise.
while anyway, that some of these questions of how much additional review is required, like you say, it's on it's sort of the responsibility of the chair of a particular board to decide that. But, you know, we all serve by appointment to the Board of Trustees. So if the Board of Trustees is saying, hey, you guys are doing too much, they need to you know, make some suggestions or directives to how we're operating our business.
Yeah,
And
and
we can always say no, and if you insist, we're gonna, you know, find somebody else, but.
right. And that's what effectively this process is. And so, you know, a comment that I would make, I mean, that's a specific question that David has raised. And, you know, you have indicated that in your experience as an engineer going in front of people, it's not necessary to have the village's engineer re-review a renovation that's being signed off by an architect or that applicant's engineer. Now, you know, we're talking here, and I don't know if John has a different perspective, but I think there have been cases in the bar recently where people have felt that review was too extensive and unnecessary.
Well, I can tell you that historically, the combined planning board and bar brought an engineer online largely because of drainage issues and drainage reports that you know, the board members typically would not understand. So they would rely on the engineer to make sure that percolation data and stormwater calculations reflected whatever the requirements were. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, some of our engineers have commented more on general things, you know, whether it's the size of a spindle and different things that are really BAR review. And some of this stuff was very preliminary, so it wasn't the final plans that were submitted by the architect. And what's happened is a number of those bills for the review have really accumulated to quite a high level. And if you look at some of their review reports, you know, they're really touching on architectural issues, which is really a bar issue. And at the end of the day, when the application and the plans are submitted for approval, provided those plans are signed and stamped by the architect and there's no gross, you know, errors, you know, that's what we typically would accept. So I think some of these bills are because the engineer has kind of gone off in different avenues outside of what we typically would have requested, you know, for a number of years.
Right, and so I'm saying that this is a, you know, the trustees have brought up a useful process for us to go through and look at how it's working recently. And to me, the fix to that is not reassigning how our process is. The fix is telling the engineer, this is what you're focused on.
Mhm.
Um, So, so if, and Rick, obviously, I mean, I get it, Rick, that, you know, we have an atypical structure here, which the current mayor actually created. But I do think that we do have different skill sets. And so I think fundamentally it's working pretty well for the village. Which is,
I don't think you should ever change a structural process of review because you don't like the way a consultant is reviewing things. It just doesn't
precisely,
make any sense.
that is my point.
But we are changing the jurisdiction of the bar and site plan as it's presently constituted. We're not keeping it the way that it is, that we're limiting the bar to a rather small subset, and everything else goes to the planning board. But I think that, I don't know if there's a need even in the code to have the bar refer something back to the planning board if the bar is going to have the engineer there anyway. And what's the point? To get a non-engineer's view of a technical issue that the bar is dealing with on an addition?
I think, you know, I understand Jay's point that just by putting that provision in there, it gives them the optionality to refer it to us if they want to, because an applicant, if they're being sticky, can say, wait, there's no form, why, this is an extra step, it's not in the code, you can't do it. So I don't have an objection to putting that in. And then I think, you know, there were things that I needed that needed rebalancing. I mean, the fact that it's going forward and the bar did a fine job with it, but there's a house at the foot of Mountain Farm, brand new house, and we never saw it because they tore down an existing house. I think that's a mistake. I think a commercial or a educational application should be in front of us. So in my mind, this particular re-examination of the lines between the two boards is productive, and in my mind basically reflects largely the existing situation.
Well, it changes it. I think it changes it significantly with respect to new homes.
Yeah,
Right,
new
no
homes now will come before us,
longer
which I think
to be before the bar than they are
Yeah.
now. And I think that's
you're breaking up a bit,
very
Rick.
significant change. Right, but that's a significant change. I mean, at the
Yeah,
present
and-
time,
And I don't want
I
to get
have a
into the
poor connection.
history of
I don't know
why.
why that is.
I mean, there's a history about why, you know, that if there was an existing building, it didn't have to
No,
go to the
I was
planning
part of
board.
that history. I remember it.
Yeah, so somebody just wanted to,
So,
you know. So,
If you don't mind, I think it started if there was evidence of an existing building, and then it changed not too long into that, where if there was proof of an existing building that had a C of O for a certain time. So there was some changes there.
yeah, but basically, I mean,
5
a
years.
new house is a significant, and their review of at the planning board may be minimal, as this house at the bottom of the hill, you know, is there, this is there, you know, one and done. But I do think a new house should be in front of the planning board. So,
Well, we've already divided this up as of the last meeting, right?
Right.
And I don't think that's being challenged presently. So we'll
No.
keep all of that. I can put, excuse me? No?
no, I agree. I think the only thing that we were talking about is Jay's referral mechanism.
Okay,
To add that language. And I wanted everybody to hear and just
yeah,
think about.
that's easy. I can put that in there.
Okay,
It will say that the bar may refer- bar may refer-
You are unfortunately having sound issues or access.
So
issues.
the provision to be added that Jay was talking about is easy.
Okay.
I'll add in there, the bar may refer any I apologize.
I think you
I
know
don't think it's
what
gonna
it
be
is that
better-
we
any
want to
better
add,
on
so we
my
won't torture the
cell
internet
phone.
here. And
I'll
it'll
I'll
come
try
back to
something
us
else.
and to the trustees and to the other board chairs, and we'll see where we go.
And Rick,
So,
just raise your hand or something so we know that it's your internet and you're not having a stroke or something.
He's all right.
You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I can add Jay's idea, and it would just be that the bar may refer any matter in whole or in part to the planning board for a report and recommendation back to the bar.
perfect. Jay?
I like it.
Okay.
Okay. So the
Rich?
next issue is this whole new idea that came up with respect to the issue of when and how to do road cuts. And when that was.
That is on hold for right now, as I understand it. I mean, maybe we're both misreading.
Yeah, it was difficult to understand the latest one from the mayor. Because I was uncertain whether he was referring to the planning board or BOT in a couple of those areas.
Right.
But I thought that he was saying that he's fine with giving the planning board those authorities as long as the board of trustees had the right to bring back that control by a majority vote. That's what I thought he was saying.
See, I thought it was just the opposite, that he was
Yeah, I'm
deciding he
not-
wanted
I'm
the
not
board
sure. I
to keep
think
that, but they might refer it to us if they felt like it.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, so the upshot is, I think I have to go back to David and say, David, what do you want to do here? I mean, I don't think it's that difficult. If they want to move those authorities to us, then we do.
Yeah,
But
but
he's,
the only problem that I see, and he was very much concerned, and I think this part was very clear, that he didn't want the board of trustees to be making certain decisions at the end of the process that would
Right.
require somebody to go through again.
Right.
But I think, certainly as to road cuts, what we had proposed, I thought was a reasonable way to do it. And that is that upon a subdivision or site plan that required road cuts, that it'd be immediately referred to the board of trustees. Board of trustees would weigh in that early process, and then it would be taken over by the planning board.
right,
wouldn't have to go
and
back.
that's where I thought we were, but that's leaving it with the Board of Trustees. So I think we just have to go back to David and say, Dave, I will go back to David and say, David, do you want to move it or you don't want to move it?
Okay, well, ask him about all this list of things: road cuts, cutting of
Right.
4 trees or more, blasting and docks.
Right, and
I can't
that-
figure out I've reread all of these emails several times, and I can't figure out that there's a singular purpose here.
But I also think that this is stepping outside of what we're doing. I think we should hand them the law with our draft with this stuff and say, okay, it's on you guys now, because. But the other issue here is it doesn't have to be that those items only get dealt with after the other boards do their thing. I think Rick's on it exactly. There should be some sort of pre-review of the application. And that's probably in John's chair, actually, because he's the gatekeeper. And he looks at an application, he says, hey, you're going to have to go to the bar for this, and you're going to have to go to planning for that. And, oh, I know that property. If you're going to do this, you're cutting rock or blasting. So we're going to have to bring in the trustees. And there should be an early meeting that divides all that stuff up.
So in general, I think that is what happens in the issue that is stirring things up here. The applicant chose to push forward on things because I, had conversations where there are various issues that are not resolved and you are just moving forward here. So I'm not sure that this is,
Well, and then I guess there also needs to be, this goes back to whatever, the board chair and mayor's, coffee hour, where somebody has to say, hey, wait a minute, we can't finish, if we're, say, planning board, have you been to the bar yet? Oh, no, we're not going to do that. Time out, that's not the way the process works.
And people shouldn't be going to the BZA and multiple bites at the apple. Figure out what you're doing and go.
Right.
So that's
That's a larger issue than us, and that's a larger issue than what our task was here tonight.
Exactly. So I
We
think
have in the law right now with respect to road cuts, and I can change it given our conversation, but we had in there that it gets referred to the Board of Trustees for road cuts. They give a recommendation, planning board goes through, and then the Board of Trustees gives the final approval afterwards. We could simply take out that last step
okay.
and say that the Board of Trustees, when it gets referred, shall approve, subject to the planning board's review, where the road cut is, or make it just a recommendation. And then the planning board is one that determines it, which is in every other municipality that I know of. The Board of Trustees doesn't determine
Right.
road cuts. but
Right.
The planning board determines the road cuts, for
Okay.
better or for worse.
Well, it's a planning issue. I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
there are a number of things that our Board of Trustees has purview for that don't make any sense from an engineering standpoint or a process standpoint.
And, I think these are things that have accreted over, since 1880.
I think what it is, a lot of times, and I see it in different forms, not on this particular topic of road cuts, where boards of trustees or town boards say, well, I'm not sure I really want to trust that. That's sort of, there's a lot of politics involved with what's good and what's bad for the village, and that should be a fundamental decision by the legislative body. But what happens most of the time, and I'm not talking about Tuxedo Park, I'm just talking generally, for those boards that retain that type of authority, sometimes through special permits on things that the planning board is site plan and the town board is a special permit because they wanted to be able to control the process. Typically, when it gets to them, it's like, well, I don't really want to deal with this, right? And they don't want to do the permit, but they have to because that's what the jurisdiction says. So I think that it's better that we'll just make the Board of Trustees recommends to the planning board that the road cut should be in a certain spot. And most times you're going to take that recommendation. If the board feels really strongly, except if there's a contrary engineering issue, that this is where they would rather have an entry onto their roads, right? They determine those roads and they maintain those roads, et cetera. But here, I think you take the recommendation. I think the planning board will take it seriously, and then make the final determination based upon that recommendation in engineering matters. We could add to that the docks and other things, but I just assume, just for
Yeah,
right
I think
now,
we
I
need
would
to
say
pause on that.
just the road cuts, and then you deal with those other 3 or 4 issues with the mayor, and
Yeah.
we'll get some clarity. So I'll redo this local law with those 2 changes.
Okay.
With respect to the road cuts not getting the last bite by the Board of Trustees, and the ability of the bar to refer matters over to the planning board for a report and recommendation.
Okay. Super.
Right, and
All
then,
right.
and then that sounds like the model, when you're talking to the mayor, we did it for the road cuts, you said that was a problem. If they want to do the same thing with blasting, et cetera, they have the model, we just swap the language.
Right.
The only other thing I'm going to say is, Rich, you haven't said anything. You got anything to say?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
we can.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Okay. Just an overall picture is we're trying to make this easier for the applicant to get through the process. And the feedback we're getting is that some people are going through a nightmare, even though how hard we're working to make it possible for them to reach their conclusion. So I was just wondering if at times the boards would want to meet together to make some things go easier through. Like, I know a lot of towns have the planning board and the BAR as one. I don't know if that's practical or not, or if we could use it as a sliding scale.
For history, they were one, and
Mhm.
Mayor McFadden separated them. Now, more than 10 years ago. And so I think there's a valid point that depending on the application, you know, and so I make sure that our minutes, so if there's something like the house on Tower Hill, I make sure our minutes go to the bar and talk with the bar chair so that they know what we've been doing so that we're not whipsawing the applicant.
Rich,
And-
to answer your question, I think it doesn't require any changes in the code at all. The two boards can, if they so desire,
Just
have a
meet
joint
together.
meeting.
Yeah.
Right, so that there's one presentation. However, each of the boards are still going to be distinct boards. It's not sort of a joint board. It'd be two distinct boards hearing the same thing at the same time. The conversations can be interspersed among them. And then when they make their determinations, they'd make them again discreetly between the bar's determination and the planning board's determination. But they could have, whenever they want to, have joint meetings if they think that that will expedite the process.
Yeah, and that is a good point. That if we get something where we think, you know, it would be more effective to have a joint meeting, then we can do it. As I say, I've been doing it in a sense behind the scenes to making sure, like with this house on Tower Hill, making sure that the bar knows exactly what we've done and here it is, and these are the issues, so that the process runs more smoothly.
And the other thing, the house you mentioned on the bottom of Camp Comfort,
Mhm.
who's overseeing the building of that house?
That's the bar, because of the way the code is currently split up, that is the bar,
Okay,
because there was an existing building there that got torn down. And that's why I'm suggesting, if we're in here looking at the law, a new house, whether it's got a shed, an existing building, or whatever, should come to the planning board first.
okay.
Now, once I make these few changes, who should I be sending it to? Because it's really only an interim document.
I would send it, if it's okay, which I think it is, I would send it back to David and to us, because we know what we talked about. And then I will talk to David about, or it is, David can move it on to the other boards and the trustees.
Okay.
So with that, if there is nothing else to discuss, can I have a motion to conclude the meeting?
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
All right.
Well, I wish everyone do you still have a cold, poor Rick?
Yeah, it's just hanging on. It's nothing important.
I wish everyone a healthy and happy holiday season and a good tee up to 2022. It's kind of horrifying that we're up to 2022 already.
Better than
But
the
I hope
almanac.
everyone gets a
That's
chance
right.
to relax, be with
Yeah.
family, enjoy.
Great holidays, everyone.
You too.
and
Okay.
See you
Rick,
soon.
Take care.
Thank
Rick,
you.
use my great grandmother's recipe. Tea and whiskey till you feel better.
I like it. Take care.
Take
Good night.
care.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.